Ex-wife challenged the ex-husband at the investor dinner until a secret envoy requested only her name. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. Chloe Hamilton stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, the sound of lively conversations and clinking glasses swirling around her. The investor dinner was in full swing, but for Chloe, tonight was about more than just business deals and networking. She was here for one thing, Ethan Hamilton. The man who once shared her life, her dreams, and her heart, but now, they were nothing more than strangers with a shared past. She adjusted her dress, a sleek black gown that clung to her frame, and entered the room, her eyes scanning the crowd. She found him immediately, Ethan, standing at the far end of the room, laughing with a group of investors, his smile just as charming as it had been when they were married. But the smile didn't reach his eyes, not anymore. They locked eyes across the room, and for a moment, everything else seemed to disappear. Chloe took a deep breath. It had been months since their divorce, but the feelings between them were still raw, still unresolved. She couldn't help but wonder if he felt the same tension, the same pull, that she did. But tonight, she wasn't here to dwell on the past. She had come for a reason. As she made her way toward him, the whispers of the guests grew louder. They knew who she was, of course. Chloe Hamilton, the woman who had once been the perfect wife, now an ex-wife, the subject of many rumors and speculations. Her reputation had taken a hit after the divorce, but Chloe wasn't one to let that slow her down. She had rebuilt herself, created a life outside of her marriage, and she had no intention of letting Ethan's presence ruin it. When she finally reached Ethan, his smile faded just slightly, but he quickly masked it with a polite greeting. "Chloe, it's been a while," he said, his voice smooth but guarded. "It's good to see you," Chloe replied, her tone cool, but her heart racing. She could feel the eyes of the room on them, the unspoken tension that hung in the air. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a confrontation. And Chloe was ready. "How's business, Ethan?" she asked, her voice laced with a subtle challenge. Ethan's smile tightened, and he took a step back, as if bracing himself for what was to come. "It's good, very good. You know how it is." Chloe nodded, but her gaze never left his. "I heard you're working on some new projects. Big ones." She wasn't just talking about business. She was talking about the things he had done since their divorce. The things he had hidden from her. "Always looking for the next big thing," he said, his tone almost dismissive, but Chloe could see the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. She wasn't going to let it go that easily. Just then, a figure appeared beside them, interrupting their tense exchange. The room seemed to hush as a man dressed in a sharp suit approached. His presence was commanding, his expression unreadable. He nodded at Chloe, then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Hamilton," the man said, his voice low but clear. "I've been asked to speak with Ms. Hamilton. Only her name is required for the moment." Chloe's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea who this man was or what he wanted, but one thing was certain, he wasn't here by accident. And neither was she. Chloe stood still as the man's words echoed in her ears. "Only her name is required for the moment." The silence that followed seemed to stretch on forever. Ethan's eyes flickered between Chloe and the man, a faint frown tugging at his lips. It was clear that he was as puzzled as she was, but there was something in the stranger's presence that made Chloe uneasy. The man had an air of authority, one that didn't belong in a casual dinner like this. His tailored suit and his sharp gaze suggested he wasn't just some random attendee. Chloe had seen enough in her life to know when someone was more than they appeared. She crossed her arms, standing her ground. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the whirlwind of questions in her mind. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly, as if weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his tone calm yet firm. That's not important right now. What matters is that you come with me. There are matters that need your attention. Chloe narrowed her eyes, a spark of suspicion lighting within her. She wasn't someone who took orders lightly, especially not from a stranger at a business dinner. I don't even know who you are, she said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. Why should I go with you? The man's gaze never wavered. You will understand soon enough. It's a matter of urgency. Please follow me. The tension in the air was palpable. Chloe glanced at Ethan, who had been silent up until now. He looked just as confused as she felt, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, concern, perhaps? He wasn't as unaffected by this as he wanted to appear. Chloe didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing that she was rattled. But something about the situation was unsettling, and her instincts were on high alert. The man's eyes never left her, and Chloe could tell he wasn't going to leave without her. Her mind raced as she weighed her options. Going with him could mean answers, but it also could lead her into something far more dangerous than she could predict. But in that moment, her curiosity got the better of her. Fine, Chloe said, her voice cold. I'll go. But you better have a good explanation. The man nodded slightly, as if he had anticipated her response. Without another word, he turned and began walking toward the exit, leaving Chloe with no choice but to follow. As she passed by Ethan, she felt his gaze on her, but she refused to meet his eyes. She had to make her own decisions now. The man led her through the crowded room, and the buzz of conversation seemed to fade away with each step. The further they went, the more out of place Chloe felt. This wasn't the glamorous business dinner she had expected. This was something else entirely. The man stopped near a side door, his hand resting lightly on the handle. This way, he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Chloe took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. She had no idea what she was walking into, but she knew one thing for certain: her life was about to change. She could feel it in her bones. As the door swung open, the cool night air hit her, and the sounds of the event were replaced by the quiet hum of the city beyond. She stepped out, the man right behind her, and for the first time in a long while, Chloe felt the weight of the unknown settle over her. What had she just gotten herself into? Chloe stepped out into the cool night air, the sound of the bustling dinner slowly fading behind her. She could feel the stranger's presence close behind her, his footsteps echoing against the quiet streets. The city was alive, but at that moment, it felt eerily distant. The man led her down a narrow alley, the kind of place she would have never walked through on her own. Her heels clicked on the pavement, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea where they were going, and every instinct in her screamed to turn around and walk back to the safety of the dinner. But something was holding her in place. A feeling of curiosity, perhaps a need for answers. She couldn't explain it, but she knew she had to follow. Where are we going? Chloe asked, breaking the silence between them. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced back at her, his face as unreadable as ever. All in good time, he replied cryptically. Chloe didn't like the sound of that. She wasn't one for mysteries, and she definitely didn't like being kept in the dark. I don't appreciate being kept in suspense, she said, her voice firm. I need to know what's going on. Now. The man stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression finally softening just a fraction. You'll understand soon. Just trust me. Chloe narrowed her eyes. Trust. It was something she had learned the hard way to never give away easily. She had trusted Ethan once, and look where that had gotten her. But this wasn't about him. This was about her, and the strange pull that was leading her further into the unknown. You expect me to just follow you without knowing what's going on? Chloe asked, her tone incredulous. The man nodded. Yes. Because what's ahead is something only you can handle. You'll see why soon enough. Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something much bigger than herself. But there was no turning back now. They had reached the end of the alley, and before her stood an unmarked black car, its sleek design blending with the shadows. The man opened the door for her, gesturing for Chloe to get in. "After you," he said, his voice steady. Chloe hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. But then, she made up her mind. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. She stepped into the car, and the door clicked shut behind her. The man slid into the seat next to her, and with a simple gesture, the driver started the car. Chloe glanced around at the dark interior, the silence almost suffocating. She wanted to ask more questions, but she could tell that this wasn't the time. The man beside her remained quiet, his eyes focused on the road ahead. Chloe couldn't help but wonder who had sent him. What did they want from her? And more importantly, what was she about to get herself into? The car sped through the city, leaving behind the glittering lights of the dinner and the comfort of the known. With every passing block, Chloe felt the weight of her decision settle deeper into her chest. She was heading into uncharted territory, and she wasn't sure whether it was going to be a journey of discovery or a path to something darker. As the car turned a corner, Chloe finally broke the silence. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice softer now, though still edged with uncertainty. The man didn't answer right away. He merely glanced at her from the corner of his eye, his expression still unreadable. "All in good time," he said once again, as if those words held all the answers she needed. But Chloe wasn't satisfied. She wasn't the type to wait patiently for answers, not anymore. The car continued on, and with each passing moment, Chloe could feel the gravity of the situation pulling her in deeper. She was about to find out exactly how deep this rabbit hole went. And there was no turning back. The car continued its steady journey. Through the night, the city lights now far behind. Chloe sat in the back seat, her mind racing with questions she could hardly form into words. The man beside her had been silent for what felt like forever, his gaze fixed ahead, the lines of his face unreadable. The car's interior was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights that flashed past the windows. Chloe glanced at him once more, trying to understand who he was and what he wanted with her. But nothing about him made sense. Every time she asked, he avoided giving a real answer. The silence was suffocating, but Chloe's curiosity couldn't be contained. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked, her voice strained but steady. The man didn't look at her, his tone unwavering. "You'll know when we get there." Chloe's patience was wearing thin. She wasn't used to being kept in the dark, especially not about something this important. "I'm done waiting," she snapped, leaning forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "I deserve to know what's going on." "Why me? Why now?" The man remained calm, his expression still not betraying a hint of emotion. "You'll find out soon enough," he replied, his voice low and controlled. Chloe gritted her teeth, frustrated but unable to shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something significant. She needed answers. And she wasn't going to stop until she got them. The car turned another corner, and the world outside the window seemed to shift. They were no longer in the city's heart, but in a quieter, more secluded area. Chloe's heart began to race. Where were they going? The man finally spoke again, breaking the silence. "We're almost there." His words did little to ease her anxiety, and the closer they got to wherever they were heading, the more uncertain Chloe became. The streetlights grew fewer and farther between, replaced by shadows that seemed to deepen with each passing block. Finally, the car pulled into a small, gated driveway, and the man instructed the driver to stop. Chloe's heart skipped a beat as the car came to a halt in front of a large, imposing building. It was modern, sleek, and entirely out of place in the quiet neighborhood. The building loomed over them, its windows dark, but something about it felt unsettling. The man opened the door and gestured for Chloe to follow him. "This way," he said, his voice no longer leaving room for questions. Chloe hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. The cold night air hit her, the silence of the area amplifying the beating of her heart. She followed the man to the entrance, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The door to the building creaked open, and Chloe stepped inside. The atmosphere was completely different from the outside world. Inside, It was warm, sleek, and quiet, but there was something cold about the place, an underlying tension in the air that Chloe couldn't quite place. The man led her through the darkened halls, the only light coming from a few strategically placed lamps. It all felt too calculated, too deliberate. Finally, they arrived at a door at the end of the hall. The man opened it, revealing a small, dimly lit room. A single chair sat in the middle of the room, and a large desk covered in papers stood against the far wall. Chloe's stomach tightened. This was it. Whatever was happening, she had finally arrived at the heart of it. "Take a seat," the man instructed, his voice calm. Chloe didn't move. "What is this? What do you want from me?" The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he walked to the desk, his hands steady as he picked up a folder. Without looking at her, he opened it, scanning the contents. "You've been chosen," he finally said, his words like a dagger to her chest. Chloe's breath caught in her throat. Chosen? Chosen for what? Before she could ask, the man looked up, his eyes locking with hers. "There are things that only you can do. You're in a position of power, Chloe. And it's time for you to embrace it." Chloe's mind was spinning. Power? Her? What was he talking about? She opened her mouth to protest, but the words didn't come. All she could do was stare at the man, trying to make sense of the situation. "You're here because it's time for you to take control of your life," the man continued. "But you'll have to make some difficult choices. And the first choice starts now." Chloe's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was certain: her life was about to change. She had walked into something much bigger than she had ever imagined, and there was no turning back now. The room was quiet, the air heavy with expectation. Chloe stood still, her mind racing as the man's words echoed in her ears. "You've been chosen." What did that even mean? Chosen for what? Her mind tried to piece together the fragments of the conversation, but nothing made sense. She had walked into this building expecting answers, but all she had gotten was more questions. The man stood across from her, his calm demeanor unshaken by her visible distress. His eyes were fixed on her, as though he could read every thought running through her mind. Chloe wasn't sure if that made her more uneasy or just frustrated. She had always prided herself on being in control, but this situation was beyond her comprehension. "What do you mean by that?" she finally asked, her voice quiet but firm. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked over to the desk, his steps measured, and picked up a small, unmarked envelope. He held it out to her. Chloe hesitated for a moment, then took the envelope from him, her fingers brushing against his. She opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper with only a few words written on it. *Time to act. The choice is yours. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. What was this? Was this some kind of test? Or a warning? The man watched her closely, waiting for her to speak. "What does this mean?" Chloe asked again, her voice now tinged with frustration. The man stepped closer to her, his expression still unreadable. "It means that you are at a crossroads. The choice you make here will change the course of your life. There is no going back once the decision is made." Chloe's mind spun. Was this a threat? Or an opportunity? She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but something told her that this man wasn't going to give them to her, not until she made her decision. "And what happens if I refuse to make a choice?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in them. "Then nothing will change. You will continue living your life as it is, but you will always wonder what could have been. The decision is yours, Chloe." Chloe felt the weight of his words settle over her. She was being asked to make a choice, but the implications were too vast, too unknown. Her life had already been turned upside down, and now she was supposed to make a decision that could alter everything once again. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that, but deep down, she knew that there would never be a perfect time. There was only the present, and whatever future she chose. The man took a step back, his gaze still fixed on her. "You don't have to decide now, but the time will come. And when it does, you'll have to be ready. Chloe stared at him, trying to understand what he meant. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was nothing to understand. This wasn't about logic or reasoning. It was about something deeper, something she had yet to fully grasp. She looked down at the paper in her hand, the words staring back at her. Time to act. The choice is yours. What happens if I choose to act? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. That's something you'll have to find out for yourself. Chloe looked at the man, her resolve hardening. She didn't know what was coming, but she was done waiting. She was ready to find out. The choice was hers. And she was about to make it. Chloe stood in the dimly lit room, the piece of paper still clutched in her hand. The words on it echoed in her mind. Time to act. The choice is yours. She stared at the paper, as though the answer would appear if she looked at it long enough. The man had given her the power to choose, but the weight of that decision felt almost too much to bear. What if she chose wrong? What if the path she selected led her down a road she couldn't come back from? The man was still standing across from her, his quiet presence somehow making the room feel even colder. She had asked him what would happen if she acted, but he hadn't given her a real answer. It was as if he was waiting for her to make the first move. But how could she decide something so significant with so little information? The silence stretched on, and Chloe's mind began to race. She was no stranger to tough decisions. Her divorce had been one of the hardest things she had ever gone through, but that had been a personal choice. This was different. This wasn't about her or Ethan or the life they once had. This was about something bigger, something she couldn't yet comprehend. Her heart pounded in her chest as she thought about the words chosen in act. The man had said she was at a crossroads, and now she had to make a choice that would shape her future. Was this about power? Could she really take control of her life in a way that she never had before? Chloe's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. The man stepped closer to her, his face still unreadable. He was waiting, watching, as though every moment was leading up to this one. Are you ready to make your decision? He asked, his voice soft but firm. Chloe took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she couldn't keep standing there, caught in indecision. The time had come. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, though she could feel her heart racing. The man nodded slightly, acknowledging her words, but he didn't speak right away. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the quiet room. He paused just before opening the door and turned back to look at her. Come with me, he said. It's time to see what you've chosen. Chloe felt a chill run down her spine. The door opened, and she followed him out of the room, her mind still buzzing with the weight of the decision she had just made. As they walked through the dark hallway, Chloe felt as though she were walking deeper into something far beyond her understanding. The man didn't speak, but she could sense that he was leading her somewhere important, somewhere that would finally give her the answers she had been searching for. The corridor was long and narrow, and the further they walked, the more Chloe's sense of unease grew. The silence between them was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps. They reached the end of the hall, and the man stopped in front of a heavy door. He turned to Chloe, his eyes locking onto hers. This is the next step, he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it now. Chloe felt a knot form in her stomach. She had no idea what was beyond that door, but she knew it was the beginning of whatever came next. The man opened the door, and Chloe followed him inside. The room was different from the others she had seen, bright, sterile, and filled with machines she couldn't recognize. There were several people standing around, all of them watching her as she entered. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized that they weren't just waiting for her. They were waiting for her to make her move. The man turned to face her. Welcome to the next phase, he said, his voice low and almost reverent. Chloe looked around the room, her thoughts racing. This wasn't just about making a decision anymore. This was real. The choices she had made had led her here, and now there was no turning back. Chloe took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had no idea what was coming next, but she knew she had crossed a line. The question was, would she be able to handle what came with it? Chloe stood in the sterile room, her mind whirling as the people around her watched in silence. She could feel their eyes on her, but there was no comfort to be found in their gaze. This was the next phase, the place where her decision was no longer a theoretical concept but a reality that was unfolding in front of her. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. The man who had led her here stood at the front of the room, observing her every move. His calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but there was something about his presence that made Chloe feel like a puppet, like her strings were being pulled without her consent. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. This wasn't the time to second-guess her choices. The man finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You've made it this far, Chloe. You're here because you're ready. Ready to see what lies ahead." Chloe's heart raced. She wanted to ask so many questions, but she couldn't seem to find the words. Her mind was clouded with a mix of fear, excitement, and uncertainty. What exactly had she gotten herself into? "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. "Now you'll begin the journey. The one you've chosen?" He turned toward the others in the room, a silent signal that they should begin. Chloe's eyes followed his gaze, and she saw a few people step forward, holding various devices and papers. They began to work quietly, as if they had done this 100 times before. One of them approached Chloe, a woman with short dark hair and a kind expression. "We'll need you to follow our instructions carefully," the woman said, her voice gentle but firm. "This is a crucial step. Please trust us." Chloe nodded, though she wasn't sure she could trust anyone in this room. The situation was too unfamiliar, too strange. She had never imagined that her life would take this turn. As the woman guided Chloe to a chair in the center of the room, Chloe's thoughts raced. What was the purpose of all this? What did they expect from her? But as the woman attached sensors to her wrists and forehead, Chloe realized that the answers weren't going to come easily. She was being thrust into something she couldn't yet comprehend, and there was no going back now. The room was silent except for the soft beeping of the machines around her. Chloe could feel her pulse quicken as the woman adjusted the settings on the equipment. The man, who had been standing quietly in the background, approached her again. "This is the moment, Chloe," he said, his tone solemn. "What happens here will shape everything that comes next. Are you ready?" Chloe swallowed hard. Her heart was racing, but she nodded. "I'm ready." The man gave a small nod, as if approving her response. He turned to the others in the room, signaling them to begin. Chloe felt the room around her shift as the lights dimmed and the machines hummed to life. The atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she could sense that this was the beginning of something monumental. As the woman activated the equipment, Chloe felt a strange sensation wash over her. It wasn't painful, but it was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Her mind felt as though it were being stretched, as if she were on the brink of something she couldn't yet understand. Her breath caught in her throat as the sensation deepened. The room around her seemed to blur, and for a moment she couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. This was it. The moment when her life would change forever. The man's voice cut through the fog in her mind. "This is where it begins, Chloe. The choice you made is now unfolding before you. There's no turning back." Chloe closed her eyes, her mind reeling. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next, but one thing was certain, she was committed. She had stepped into the unknown, and now there was no turning back. The world around Chloe seemed to dissolve as the sensation in her mind intensified. The beeping of the machines, the hum of the equipment, everything grew distant, like she was being pulled into a different dimension. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. She felt as if her consciousness was expanding, stretching beyond the limits of her body. The room around her faded in and out of focus, as though it were a mere illusion. She opened her eyes, but everything seemed hazy. The light in the room dimmed, and for a moment, Chloe could barely breathe. It felt like she was teetering on the edge of something monumental, something that would change her forever. Her heart raced in her chest, and her mind screamed for answers. What was happening to her? Was this what the man had meant when he said it was time to act? She could feel a strange pull, a force drawing her deeper into whatever this was. A voice broke through the fog in her mind. It was the man, his tone steady but distant. "You've made the choice, Chloe. Now you must see it through." His words felt like a tether, grounding her as her mind threatened to spin out of control. Chloe tried to focus, tried to hold on to some semblance of clarity, but the feeling of being stretched thinner and thinner was unbearable. She could feel her body, but it felt detached, as if she was both in it and outside of it. The woman who had been working with the machines moved closer, her presence sharp against the haze in Chloe's mind. "You need to stay focused," the woman said, her voice calm but insistent. "What's happening now is part of the process. It's vital that you stay present." Chloe nodded, though she wasn't sure if she was actually responding or if it was just a fleeting thought. Everything was so overwhelming. She felt as though she were being pulled apart, each sensation amplifying the disorienting force. The man's voice cut through the chaos again. "This is only the beginning, Chloe. What you're experiencing is a gateway. It's the first step in a long journey." Chloe's breath caught in her throat. A gateway? What kind of journey was he talking about? She couldn't focus enough to form the question. The woman continued to work around her, adjusting the equipment, and Chloe realized that the strange feeling in her mind was starting to ease, ever so slightly. She tried to steady her breathing, to regain control of herself, but her mind was still reeling. "Just a little longer," the woman said, her voice soothing now. "We're almost done." Chloe could barely make sense of the words. What did she mean by almost done? What was going to happen next? The sensation finally began to subside, but Chloe still felt a strange, lingering pull. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was less intense now. Her mind was no longer spinning, and the room around her began to come back into focus. The machines slowed, their beeping now less urgent, and the woman stepped back, giving Chloe some space. She felt her body return to her, the weight of it grounding her once again. The man, who had been standing silently off to the side, moved forward now, his eyes studying her intently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost as if he were testing her. Chloe took a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. Her mind was still foggy, but there was something else there too. A feeling she couldn't quite place. "Different," she said, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel changed." The man nodded, as though he had been expecting that answer. "You've crossed into something new, Chloe. You've opened a door. But this is just the beginning. There's much more for you to understand." Chloe didn't know what to say. She had no idea what was coming next, but she could feel the weight of what he was saying. This was only the start of something. She didn't know what it was, but it felt like it was already becoming a part of her, weaving itself into her life. "What now?" she asked, her voice quieter this time. The man's expression remained calm, but there was something in his eyes that Chloe couldn't quite read. "Now you wait," he said, his voice low. "The real journey begins when you're ready to face what's ahead." Chloe took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, she was in it now. There was no going back. Chloe stood there, still processing the weight of the man's words. "Now you wait," he had said, but waiting felt like the hardest thing she could do. The room was quiet again, the hum of the machines now nothing more than a distant memory. She felt like she had just passed through a door, but it wasn't a door to somewhere tangible, somewhere she could see or touch. It was a door in her mind, and now that she had crossed it, she wasn't sure what was on the other side. The man's calm demeanor hadn't changed, but there was something about him now that made Chloe uneasy. She had expected more answers, more clarity, but all she had was this strange, vague feeling that she was being set up for something bigger. The man watched her closely, and for a moment either of them spoke. Chloe was still trying to collect her thoughts, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. "You're different now," the man finally said, his voice soft but firm. "What you've just experienced isn't something most people ever will. You've taken the first step towards something monumental." Chloe's heart raced. What did he mean by monumental? What was happening to her? She opened her mouth to ask, but the words didn't come. She wasn't sure if she even knew how to ask the right questions. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice shaky. "What am I supposed to do with all of this?" The man's eyes softened, though his expression remained unreadable. "That's for you to discover. But understand this, Chloe, you've made a choice. You've chosen to open yourself up to something greater. The path ahead won't be easy, but it will be yours to walk." Chloe felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know if she was ready for any of this. Her life had already been complicated enough, and now she was being thrust into something that felt beyond her control. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped back slightly, crossing his arms in front of him. "Now we wait for you to fully realize what you've agreed to. There are forces at play that you can't yet comprehend, but soon you'll see the bigger picture. It will all make sense in time." Chloe felt a sense of dread settle over her. The idea of waiting was unbearable. She didn't want to sit here, unsure of what was coming next. She wanted action, answers. She wanted to feel like she was in control again. "How long do I have to wait?" she asked, her frustration creeping into her voice. The man tilted his head, considering her question. "Time works differently in this space," he said finally. "You'll know when the time is right. Until then, be patient." Chloe was starting to feel like she was losing control again. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "I can't just sit here and wait." The man gave her a small smile, almost as if he were amused by her frustration. "You're already ahead of most people. Patience isn't something they learn easily." Chloe didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. The silence between them stretched on, but now it felt different. It wasn't empty, it was full of potential. She was standing on the edge of something, but she couldn't see what was on the other side. It felt like a vast, open space, and she had no idea how deep it went. "What if I don't want this?" Chloe finally asked, her voice quiet. "What if I don't want to be part of whatever this is?" The man's gaze softened even further, though his eyes still held that same quiet intensity. "You've already made your choice, Chloe. You may not fully understand it yet, but you are where you need to be." Chloe's mind raced. What choice had she really made? She had agreed to step into the unknown, but she hadn't known what that would mean. Now, she was stuck in this waiting game, unsure of what was coming next. But despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, she could feel something stirring inside her. Something had shifted, and no matter how much she wanted to deny it, she knew there was no going back. Whatever was coming, she would have to face it. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was ready for. The man nodded, his expression approving, though still cryptic. "Then let's see what happens next." Chloe didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: her life was no longer in her hands. She had stepped into something much bigger, and now, there was no turning back.